What is a judge penitent? I intrigued you with that little matter. I meant no harm by it, believe me, and I can explain myself more clearly. In a manner of speaking, it's really one of my official duties. But first I must set forth a certain number of facts that will help you to understand my story. A few years ago I was a lawyer in Paris, and indeed a rather well-known lawyer. Of course, I didn't tell you my real name. I used to specialise in noble cases. The widow and orphan, as the saying goes. I don't know why, because there are widows who cheat and orphans who are quite savage. Yet it was enough for me to sniff the slightest scent of victim on a defendant for me to swing into action. And what action! A real tempest. My heart was on my sleeve. You really might have thought that justice slept with me every night. I am sure you would have admired the accuracy of my tone, the appropriateness of my emotion, the persuasion and warmth, the restrained indignation of my speeches before the court. Nature has favoured me as to my physique, and the noble attitude comes effortlessly. Furthermore, I was buoyed up by two sincere feelings: the satisfaction of being on the right side of the bar, and an instinctive scorn for judges in general. That scorn, after all, wasn't perhaps so instinctive. I know now that it had its reasons. But seen from the outside, it appeared to me to be more like a passion. It can't be denied that, for the moment at least, we have to have judges, don't we? I could not understand, however, how a man could set himself up to perform such a surprising function. I accepted the fact because I saw it, but rather as I accepted locusts, with this difference that the invasion of those Orthoptera never brought me a sou, whereas I earned my living by carrying on dialogues with people I scorned. But after all, I was on the right side. That was enough to assure my peace of conscience. The feeling of the law, the satisfaction of being right, the joy of self-esteem, cher monsieur, are powerful incentives to keep us upright or make us move forward. On the other hand, if you deprive men of them, you transform them into dogs frothing with rage. How many crimes committed merely because their authors could not endure being wrong? I once knew a businessman who had a perfect wife, admired by all, and yet he deceived her. That man was literally enraged to be in the wrong, to be cut off from receiving or granting himself a certificate of virtue. The more virtues his wife displayed, the more vexed he became. Eventually, living in the wrong became unbearable to him. What do you think he did then? He gave up deceiving her? Not at all. He killed her. That is how I came to have dealings with him. My situation was more enviable. Not only did I run no risk of joining the criminal camp, in particular I had no chance of killing my wife, being a bachelor, but I even took up their defence, on the sole condition that they should be noble murders, just as others are noble savages. The very manner in which I conducted that defence gave me great satisfactions. I was truly above reproach in my professional life. I never accepted a bribe, it goes without saying, nor again did I ever stoop to any shady proceedings, and, this is even rarer, I never deigned to flatter any journalist to get him on my side, nor any civil servant whose friendship might be useful to me. I even had the luck to see the Legion of Honour offered to me 2 or 3 times, and to be able to refuse it with a discreet dignity, in which I found my true reward. Finally, I never charged the poor and never boasted of it. Don't think for a moment, cher monsieur, that I'm bragging. I take no credit for this. The avidity which in our society is a substitute for ambition has always made me laugh. I was aiming higher. You will see that that expression is exact in my case. But you can already imagine my satisfaction. I enjoyed my own nature to the fullest, and we all know that therein lies happiness. Although to soothe one another mutually, we occasionally pretend to condemn such joys as selfishness. At least I enjoyed that part of my nature which reacted so appropriately to the widow and the orphan that eventually, through exercise, it came to dominate my whole life. For instance, I loved to help blind people cross streets. From as far away as I could see a cane hesitating on the edge of a pavement, I would rush forward, sometimes only a second ahead of another charitable hand already outstretched, snatch the blind person from any solicitude but mine, and lead him gently but firmly over the pedestrian crossing, amidst the hazards of the traffic, towards the quiet haven of the other pavement, where we would separate with a mutual emotion. In the same way, I always enjoyed telling people the way in the street, giving a light, lending a hand with heavy barrows, pushing a stranded car, buying a paper from the Salvation Army girl, or flowers from the old woman peddler, though I knew she stole them from the Montparnasse cemetery. I also liked, and this is harder to say, I liked to give alms. A very Christian friend of mine admitted that one's initial feeling on seeing a beggar approach one's house is unpleasant. Well, with me it was worse. I used to exult. But let's say no more about it. Let us speak rather of my courtesy. It was famous, and yet beyond question. Indeed, good manners provided me with great delights. If I had the luck on certain mornings to give up my seat in the bus or the underground to someone who obviously deserved it, to pick up some object an old lady had dropped and return it to her with a smile I knew well, or merely to forfeit my taxi to someone in a greater hurry than I, it was a red-letter day. I even rejoiced, I must admit, on those days when, because the public transport was on strike, I had a chance to load into my car at the bus stop some of my unfortunate fellow citizens unable to get home. Giving up my seat in the theatre to allow a couple to sit together, lifting a girl's suitcases onto the rack in a train, these were all deeds I performed more often than others, because I paid more attention to the opportunities and was better able to relish the pleasure they gave. Consequently, I was considered generous, and so I was. I gave a great deal in public and in private, but far from suffering when I had to part with an object or a sum of money, I derived constant pleasures from this. Among them a sort of melancholy which occasionally rose within me at the thought of the sterility of these gifts and the probable ingratitude that would follow. I even took such pleasure in giving that I hated to be obliged to do so. Exactitude in money matters bored me to death, and I conformed ungraciously. I had to be the master of my liberalities. These are just little touches, but they will help you to grasp the constant delights I experienced in my life, and especially in my profession. Being stopped in the corridor of the law courts by the wife of a defendant you represented for the sake of justice or pity alone, without charging a fee, hearing that woman whisper that nothing, no nothing, could ever repay what you had done for them, replying that it was quite natural that anyone would have done as much, even offering some financial help to tide over the bad days ahead, then, in order to cut the effusion short and preserve their proper resonance, kissing the hand of a poor woman and breaking away. Believe me, cher monsieur, this is achieving more than the vulgar ambitious man, and rising to that supreme summit where virtue is its own reward. Let's pause on those heights. Now you understand what I meant when I spoke of aiming higher. I was talking, it so happens, of those supreme summits, the only places I can really live. Yes, I have never felt comfortable except in lofty surroundings. Even in the details of daily life, I needed to feel above. I preferred the bus to the underground, open carriages to taxis, terraces to being indoors. I was an amateur pilot in planes in which one's head is in the open. While on boats, I was the eternal pacer on the top deck. In the mountains, I used to flee the deep valleys for the passes and plateau. At the very least, I was a man of the uplands. If fate had forced me to choose between manual labour at a lathe or as a roofer, don't worry, I'd have chosen the roofs and become acquainted with dizziness. Coal bunkers, ship holes, subways, grottos, pits were repulsive to me. I'd even developed a special loathing for speleologists who had the nerve to fill the front pages of our newspapers and whose activities nauseated me. Striving to descend 2,000 feet at the risk of getting one's head caught in a rocky funnel, a siphon as those fools say, seemed to me the exploit of perverted or traumatised characters. There was something criminal underlying it. A natural balcony 1,500 feet above a sea still visible bathed in sunlight was, on the other hand, the place where I could breathe most freely, especially if I were alone, well above the human ants. I could readily understand why sermons, decisive preachings and fire miracles took place on accessible heights. In my opinion, no one meditated in cellars or prison cells, unless they were situated in a tower with a broad view. One just became mouldy. And I could understand that man who, having entered holy orders, gave up the frock because his cell, instead of overlooking a vast landscape as he expected, looked out on a wall. Rest assured that as far as I was concerned, I did not grow mouldy. At every hour of the day, within myself and among others, I would scale the heights and light conspicuous fires, and a joyful greeting would rise towards me. Thus, at least, I took pleasure in life and in my own excellence.